In the winter of 1651, a small garrison of soldiers stood on a clifftop fortress above the North Sea and made a decision that would change Scottish history. Cromwell's army had already conquered most of Scotland. They wanted one thing inside these walls: the crown jewels of Scotland, the ancient symbols of Scottish sovereignty, the crown, the scepter, and the sword of state. The men inside refused to give them up. What followed was one of the most dramatic sieges in Scottish history, and at the center of it all was one of the most powerful families this country had ever produced. This is the story of Dunnottar Castle and the rise and fall of the House of Keith. Dunnottar Castle sits on a sea stack on the northeastern coast of Scotland, just south of the town of Stonehaven in Aberdeenshire. The promontory rises nearly 160 feet above the crashing North Sea on three sides. The only land approach is a narrow path cut into the cliff face, a path that a handful of defenders could hold against an army. This geography was no accident. Whoever controlled Dunnottar controlled the northeastern coast of Scotland, access to the sea, trade routes, the ability to receive ships and supplies from across the continent. By the 14th century, a fortress had stood on this rock for at least 1,000 years, but it was one family, the Keiths, who turned Dunnottar into the seat of power it became. The Keiths were one of the oldest noble families in Scotland. Their rise to power began not with wealth, but with a battle. According to tradition, it was a Keith warrior who killed the Danish commander at the Battle of Barron in 1010, turning the tide against a Viking invasion of the Scottish coast. As reward, the King of Scotland granted the Keiths a position no family had ever held before. They became the hereditary Earls Marischal of Scotland. The Earl Marischal was the second most powerful title in the kingdom, outranked only by the Constable of Scotland. The Marischal was personally responsible for the safety of the king's person, the king's property, and, most crucially, the king's regalia. The Scottish crown jewels themselves. For nearly 5 centuries, the Keiths guarded these symbols of Scottish sovereignty. They built Dunnottar into a fortress worthy of that responsibility. At their peak, the Keiths were fabulously wealthy. They held estates across northeastern Scotland. They raised armies. They commanded the respect of kings. In 1593, William Keith, the Earl Marischal, founded Marischal College in Aberdeen, funded entirely from the family fortune. It would become one of the oldest universities in the world. Mary Queen of Scots was entertained at Dunnottar. Kings sought the Keiths' counsel. Their word carried weight from Edinburgh to London. But power, as the Keiths would learn, has a way of turning on those who hold it. By 1650, Scotland was in crisis. Oliver Cromwell and his new model army had executed King Charles I, abolished the monarchy, and were methodically conquering the British Isles. Scotland had crowned Charles II as their king in defiance. Cromwell responded by invading. By September 1651, nearly all of Scotland had fallen. The Scottish Parliament, desperate to preserve what they could, made a decision. They sent the crown jewels north, to Dunnottar Castle. The choice made sense. The castle was nearly impregnable. The Keiths had guarded the honors of Scotland for generations, but now an English army was coming. That autumn, Cromwell's forces arrived and surrounded the headland. Inside the castle, 69 soldiers. Outside, thousands. The garrison held. Weeks passed, then months. The English settled in. They cut off all land supply routes. They brought artillery. The walls, as ancient and solid as they were, would not hold forever. By the spring of 1652, the men inside faced a question with no good answer. The crown jewels could not be surrendered. They were not simply objects. They were the physical embodiment of Scottish nationhood. If Cromwell took them, he would claim something far more powerful than gold. The answer came from 2 unlikely people, a minister's wife named Anne Lindsay, and her husband, Reverend James Granger, minister of Kinneff Church, a small coastal kirk just a few miles south of Dunnottar. Under the pretense of visiting a woman being held inside the castle, Anne Lindsay was permitted entry by the English besieging forces. Inside the walls, the honors of Scotland were divided and concealed. The crown hidden beneath the folds of her clothing. The scepter and sword of state wrapped inside a bundle of flax and carried by her servant. She walked out, past the guards, past the siege lines. She rode south along the cliff road, the crown jewels of Scotland concealed on her body. At Kinneff Church, Reverend Granger buried the honours of Scotland beneath the floorboards, where they remained for 9 years, hidden beneath a church floor, through the entirety of the Cromwellian occupation of Scotland, while English soldiers searched, while men were imprisoned and interrogated. Nobody found them. 3 weeks after the jewels were smuggled out, the castle fell. The English tore the place apart looking for the honours. The castle governor, George Ogilvy of Barras, was imprisoned and tortured. He refused to reveal where they were hidden. He did not know. When Charles II was restored to the throne in 1660, one of the first questions he asked was about the crown jewels. They were retrieved from beneath the floorboards of Kinneff Church, every piece intact. The Keiths had kept their oath, but the family's loyalty to the Stuart monarchy would ultimately destroy them. In 1715, the Jacobite Rising swept through Scotland, a final, desperate attempt to restore the Stuart dynasty to the British throne. George Keith, the 10th and final Earl Marischal, threw everything behind the cause. His name, his money, his lands, his future. The Rising failed. The consequences for the House of Keith were total. George Keith was declared a traitor. His title was attainted. His estates were forfeited to the crown. Dunnottar Castle, the seat of the family for over 300 years, was sold. George Keith fled into exile in Europe. He would spend most of the rest of his life on the continent. His brother, James Francis Edward Keith, followed him into exile and became something remarkable, a field marshal in the army of Frederick the Great of Prussia, one of the most celebrated military commanders in 18th century Europe. A man so respected by Frederick that the King of Prussia wept when he fell at the Battle of Hochkirch in 1758. His statue still stands in Berlin. George Keith eventually received a royal pardon. He returned to Scotland briefly in his old age. Frederick the Great wrote to him personally, lamenting the loss of his company. He died in 1778 in Potsdam, Prussia, the last Earl Marischal of Scotland. The title was never restored. The family never reclaimed Dunnottar. The castle fell apart through the 18th century. The roof was stripped. The floors collapsed. The great building that had sheltered a family for 300 years became the ruin it is today. The most powerful noble family in northeastern Scotland, guardians of the crown jewels, founders of a university, commanders of armies, ended with an old man dying alone in a foreign palace, 1,000 miles from home. Dunnottar Castle today is one of the most visited and most photographed sites in all of Scotland. It is easy to understand why. The approach alone is unlike anything else in Britain. A steep path drops down from the headland and climbs back up to the gatehouse, with the North Sea crashing on 3 sides. Inside, the ruins are remarkably well preserved. The great hall, the chapel, and the noble apartments still stand, roofless now, filled with sky and sea air. But their scale tells you exactly what this place once was. There is a place called the Whig's Vault. In 1685, 167 Covenanters were imprisoned in this underground chamber in conditions of deliberate brutality. Some died. Some escaped by climbing down the cliffs. Their story is still inscribed on the walls. From the ramparts, on a clear day, you can see for miles in every direction along the Aberdeenshire coast. Dunnottar is located near Stonehaven, about 15 miles south of Aberdeen. Stonehaven has a train station with regular connections from Aberdeen, and the castle is a short taxi ride from town. It is open to visitors for most of the year. The honours of Scotland, the jewels that were hidden here, smuggled out beneath a woman's skirts past Cromwell's besieging army, are on permanent display at Edinburgh Castle. Safe, intact, every single piece. The Keiths are gone, but the crown is still there. Next time on Heirs and Ruins, we go inside Glamis Castle, home of the Queen Mother, the setting of Shakespeare's most famous murder, and keeper of a family secret so dark, the Bowes Lions allegedly sealed it behind a stone wall. Subscribe so you don't miss it.